arises. What code of ethics must these robots follow?
A monument considered by some conservative Christians to be satanic was badly damaged by an explosive device.
Oil and slave labor. These two wonderful industries make modern life a breeze. And what this fine little filly doesn't realize is that her chic accessories and stunning appearance come from oil and slave labor.
Huh?
That's right, classy lassie. Everything from your thong to your nail polish, your smartphone to your eyelashes come from oil and slave labor. Your top from Uzbekistan. Shorts from China. Jewelry from Indonesia. And your iPhone from Taiwan.
Oh no, not my iPhone!
Steve Jobs may have been a genius, but he couldn't work like a 5-year-old Asian boy can. Even your bra and panties from Bangladesh. Whoa there! Looks like science can go no further. Except for these silicone beauties from DuPont.
Hey.
Oil and slave labor, making the Western world beautiful.
2 up. All right. I'm not sure what he's doing out there. It looks like he's going to burn a flag, and Rick Monday runs and takes it away from him. And so Monday, I think a guy was going to set fire to the American flag. Can you imagine?
Barcode babies. They have barcodes on their face. Isn't that weird? Check this out. Barcodes on their face. I'm here with Leo Lyons Zagami, the man, the myth, the legend. How you doing, Leo?
Very well.
What happened?
Oh, he just got bricked. He just got bricked. Yeah, he got bricked.
Hogwash! What? Unsubstantiated fantasy! Lies! Lies! Lies!
Why is it up there? It's the Constitution was to protect the people from the government, not the government from the people. It's absolutely our footage. There have been many lies told about Roseanne Boylan and other deaths that day. My daughter was not the only one to die that day. There have been lies told about my daughter. There have been this pushed forward as an insurrection when not one person's been charged with insurrection, so it needs to be stopped pushing forward as an insurrection. And the bad behavior that day was initiated by the Capitol Police, and if not initiated, at least perpetuated by the Capitol Police.
What if everything that David Icke said was true? Was true, was true, was true. Like our entire lives are hologram of mirrors, and the entire royal family are shape-shifting letters. Meanwhile, the moon is hollow and 9/11 was perpetrated to economically enslave an entire species, while the satanic pedophilia cabals are trying to control humanity via Agenda 2030 while infusing AI directly into the human mind, creating a synthetic human 2.0. Like some fucked up MK Ultra, but we don't even exist, therefore it doesn't really matter.
It is probable that most of the public figures and military men involved in the secret scheme are unaware of the real goals or who is really behind it. Jordan, I've got to ask, what's going on here?
Well, let's start with a term that we're hearing quite a bit about in the last couple of years, the New World Order. Our president is going all around the world proclaiming a New World Order. Incidentally, all the presidents, living presidents, along with many of the heads of state throughout the world are going to meet, according to the LA Times, are going to meet.
Right now, it's a critical time because we know that we not only fight for Ukraine, we fight for this new world order for the democratic countries.
This is Baby X, so she's basically an autonomously animated virtual infant. All of her behaviors are generated on the fly by neural networks running live, and so she's seeing me and listening to me and responding to what I do. So she's going to start wondering what I'm doing and starting to get upset because I'm not paying attention to her. So I need to calm her down, but I have to talk to her like a real...
60 million people died between 1900 and 1946. And since then we established a liberal world order, and that hadn't happened in a long while. A lot of people dying, but nowhere near the chaos. And now is a time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. And we've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it. So anyway.
You can stick your new world order up your ass. You can can stick your new world order up your arm. You can stick your new world order when the sun don't shine below ya. Stick your new world order up your arm. Singing we are the 99%. Singing we are the 99%. Singing we are the 90. Together we are 90. We are the 99%.
Attention, a curfew is in effect at 1800 hours until 600 hours tomorrow. All individuals must leave the U.S. Capitol grounds or be subject to arrest. I repeat, a curfew is in effect at 1800 hours until 600.
Hear this. You are not alone. This is the resistance. You are not alone. This is the resistance. You are not alone. This is the resistance.
Now, you don't know it yet, but you are listening to History in the Making while you are listening to this show.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man, yet as mortal as his own.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
Censored by the mainstream media, the destroyer of fake news, and your host of the Rundown Live, Kriston T. Harris.
Welcome to another edition of the Rundown Live, rundownlive.com. I'm your host, and I'm here with Don Vi Jr. My name's Kriston T. Harris, well-known independent journalist. I've covered some amazing stuff, including the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. I was a witness in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. You know, I covered recently the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and I've been going around doing speaking engagements on who owns you and who owns your mind all across America. And so today we are back on the radio to our host, KGRA-DB, one of the world's largest digital broadcasting stations right here in America. And we're broadcasting live out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Our videos are now cataloged on the legendary Band.video. Band.video, we receive thousands of views over there. So make sure you guys subscribe to Band.video. And if you are looking for a way, to find out more information about us, therundownlive.com. Look at this. This is our website. We've got people writing for us now. We have a little link tree on the right. And if you want to support us, there's only two ways really you can support us. You can buy these new, highly attractive, sexy Rundown Live shirts. You know who would look good in one of these? You know, Alex Stein's favorite big booty Latina, AOC. She'd look good in one of these. Did you see Alex Stein? He's causing trouble.
I saw that.
He's sexually harassing AOC, and she came and gave the peace sign. Like, she's like, yeah, I'm a big booty Latina. And then all of a sudden she's like, I hate the internet troll Alex Stein. And then she like blocked him and banned him. And he's like, you don't even love me. You didn't even tag me. Alex Stein is trolling. And you know what? People are addicted to trolls. And it's been about a month since we've been on the air. First of all, we should mention we have an amazing guest today. Anti-war advocate and journalist and contributor for the LA Progressive, is joining us. Dave DeCamp. He's starting a new podcast called Anti-War. And who here likes war? We always talk about thought-terminating cliches and the term anti, but one thing most people don't want in their life is war. And we're seeing a lot of it, wars and rumors of wars and everything else. And he'll be here to break down his juggernaut of a website, antiwar.com. They're still huge. And it's funny how anti-war, which is, something that both conservatives and liberals kind of brings people together, we can all relate to and we can agree upon. And that's something on the show we like to do often. We like to show that there aren't that many things that divide us, as the world would like to scream that everything divides us.
Exactly. I've always say you always have more in common with your neighbor, with your friend, with this random stranger of opposite political or religious or whatever ideology than you have with any of these parasites in the ruling class that just love to screw everybody over and get rich and have power and all that sort of stuff.
Well, something, how many people out there, they talk to their neighbor, and as long as they avoid politics, they're best friends. And then every, 2 or 4 years, somebody puts a sign in the front yard and that reminds them that there's something that divides them and makes it different. And, obviously a lot has happened in the last 30 days since we've been live. And that being said, one of those things is the Roe versus Wade issue. And I've strongly and always believed that the reason why Democrats had not codified Roe versus Wade, which they could have, to make it all but permanent, is they use it as a tool to get re-elected. Meaning, like, they need the division. They need you worried that you're going to lose that right in order for you to vote for them. And, like, listen, on the right, the same kind of thing happens. That, like, literally, they could have banned abortion, I think, in a lot of cases and stand in different states. And they use it as a way to get reelected. And I bet if you talk to a lot of politicians on their stump speeches, it's probably one of the top 3 subjects. Also, something interesting that's happened on something that I kind of, I can relate to. And I kind of, I felt a little bit excited and happy about it, but at the same time, I had to really check myself. You want to know what that is, Don?
What was that?
The destruction of the Georgia Guidestones. Like, who would have thought that the Georgia Guidestones would have been targeted and destroyed by, we still don't know who. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, especially since, we don't know who it was, and also how it just kind of, fell out of the news cycle very, very quickly. And I'm in the same boat with you at the same time. I was like, I'm honestly surprised it took that long for someone to do something. And at the same time, I'm just like, but is it really going to accomplish anything? Because now we have all these articles out there talking about, this wonderful monument that was up there that was, supposed to help everybody, and, just pushing this this narrative that, it wasn't a, a Masonic symbol for depopulating the world and controlling everyone's lives and all this other nonsense. So it's a double-edged sword. And I think, they're using it to their advantage to just sort of get, sympathy, I guess.
Well, the first thing I want to say that really surprised me about the Georgia Guidestones is how viral it went on TikTok. Every TikTok was Georgia Guidestones. People were like, what are the Georgia Guidestones? I was reading the liberal Antifa forum.
You're getting a lot of really bad static and distortion.
All right, man. It's interesting. It's interesting to me that I was reading some of these liberal forums, right? And they were like, what is it? Like, no one knew in the left what the Georgia Guidestones were. And they're like, I don't know, but it's really got all the conservatives really excited. It must be, something we stand for, or whatever. All they knew is that they were going to take the adversarial aspect, and people wanted to know what the Georgia Guidestones were. And of course, there was some anti-conspiracy theorist in there that was like, well, it's just, it's what we need to live by and abide by. And it's really a good thing they put it up there, the 10 commandments that the world should follow. And so the media, everyone in the media, like, I never thought the Georgia Guidestones and the New World Order conspiracy would be the forefront of the news, at least for a couple of days. And it was. It was. I was like,
Yeah.
we would be banned if we talked about this right now, bro. Like, they would be like, YouTube, those guys are conspiracy theorists. Why is it that the mainstream media can talk about these things and we cannot? It's because essentially they're government sanctioned media. They're approved by the social media gods, which, by the way, if you guys haven't been following me, you want to know, I've been getting a lot of messages, text messages. What happened to your Facebook? Because I had like 7,000 or 8,000 followers on Facebook, above and beyond my 5,000 friends. So about 12,000 people on my personal profile. And essentially they expunged it. It's disappeared. I've been sent into purgatory where I'm constantly waiting for review now for 30 days. And the last time they banned me was when we exposed Bilderberg. We knew Bilderberg was coming up, and we were the ones. Don Vi let me know it was happening. I reached out to an individual that I knew that has been highly involved in communication with Bilderbergers in the past, that type of deal. Found out where it was. I let Burmis know, and all of a sudden Luke Rakowski and a bunch of journalists were there. I'm not saying it was me, but obviously they went ahead and they banned my Facebook because, as you know, Bilderberg, which met in D.C. this year, and very few people really talked about it, was started by Prince Bernard, a former SS soldier. And basically, it was like to push forward a lot of the Nazi World War II ideology in a way that is more diet, more acceptable. And essentially, this organization has been meeting since 1954, and the VP from Facebook was there. Oh, who would have thought? You know, they like the socialism as long as it's, you know, they get invited to cool, like, social clubs like Bohemian Grove, which I also was supposed to be at right now, which has started last weekend. And this Friday, by the way, we have a guest lead singer and artist of the Sacred Owls, a rockabilly band specifically designed and used to promote and bring awareness to an elitist organization called Bohemian Grove, where all the top politicians and world leaders go to, and they're all white, all Caucasian, 1,500 of them, you know, white elitist group, but nobody on the left in Southern Poverty Law Center, nobody disagrees with it because they're the ones that fund it. You know, it's so wild to me. And I want to know who's at Bohemian Grove. So if you guys are there, show tips at the Rundown Live. You know, I wonder why like Alex Stein 99 ain't out at Bohemian Grove. He's like, yeah, let's go touch the PPs. Let's go, guys. You know, he kind of fit in with some of the LGBTQ stuff he's been wearing over there. But, you know, so you know what was really interesting to me, and this is hot off the press about the Georgia Guidestones. They literally, a lot of people were like, first of all, the person that was nailed for bombing it, he hasn't been nailed, but on video was nailed. I noticed he was wearing all black out. It was all black, literally like a Foot Clan member. So I was reading forums, and everyone was like, you know, it was probably a Christian, a conservative Christian, complete right-wingist. And I asked them, well, are Christians the only ones against neo-fascism? And all of a sudden they're like, well, I just don't think a Satanist or an atheist would. Well, you know, if a Satanist wouldn't do it, I'm not saying Satanists are bad. I'm just saying adversarial. Satan means adversarial. You know, it's interesting to me to see that people were really quick to jump to conclusions as where this really could have been, you know, maybe somebody that wanted to frame an alt-right. This is a way for them to go after people who have conspiracy mindset. And I thought, the first thing I thought is they're going to use this to shut down any conversation of the term New World Order. New World Order. And it turns out that there's all of a sudden on TikTok, I was seeing this. I was seeing that there was a gubernatorial candidate, a governor candidate, who was running in Georgia, who wanted to have the Georgia Guidestones destroyed because essentially they become a symbol of global oppression. Have they not?
Yeah, no. And, you know, as you were actually telling me earlier, apparently this, you know, as the headline says, you know, she got swatted apparently, which is news to me. You know, I followed the Georgia Guidestone story. I hadn't heard of this. So it's actually really interesting that had happened.
Yeah, Candace Taylor in Georgia, 2022, ran for governor. In one of the commercials she had, she's like, "Yeah, let's take down the Georgia Guidestones." And for those out there on the left that don't really understand, and I like the left because they're skeptical of the right, and the right is skeptical of the left. And somewhere, you sift through it and you get some gold nuggets at the bottom, like you're panning for gold. And essentially, that's what finding news is nowadays. You have to go through all the BS. But she literally had a commercial is like, let's tear down the Georgia Guidestones. And people didn't even know they existed. I can't believe in just about every liberal forum, they all wanted to know what it was and why the right is so excited and why the TikTok is on fire with these Georgia Guidestones. And so Scott Welter is a famous archaeologist. He's known for America on Earth and History Channel. He did a show that day when it was destroyed. And as you know, on America on Earth, he did a whole episode on who created the Georgia Guidestones. And it turned out that it was a sect of Freemasonry known as the Rosicrucians. And if you don't know about the Rosicrucians, they are basically the mystery religion. The Babylonian mystery religion. I believe one of their actual ranks is called Illuminati. That's not even a joke. That's literally one of their ideologies. And normally it's like Aleister Crowley, New Age, sex magic, that kind of thing. And not everyone in Rosicrucianism is involved in this, but there are groups that are. And they're the ones that seem to be very, as you know, the mystery Babylon philosophy, the old world order was run by Nimrod from Babylon and his mother and wife, who he had incestuous relationships with, Semiramis. That's why the elite interbreed to this very day, because it believes that it gives them some kind of bloodline power. They ran the old world order. So this idea that the Guidestones are somewhat nefarious is not entirely false. It isn't entirely false. However, I don't support damage of private property of anything. Like, literally, I get it. The sentiment, it's a symbol of oppression, but this is right up there with tearing down Confederate statues, which, I would rather have them in a museum. I get it. You don't like what they stand for, even though Albert Pike statue, one of the, founding members of the KKK, is still sitting, and you can look that up. It's in the Coyle Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. It says that he was one of the founding members. His statue is right up there in Washington, D.C., and no one seems to have a problem with it, but yet everyone's all up in arms now about these Georgia Guidestones. So they went on and they tore down rest of the pillars. And to be honest, I would have preferred to have them up to have a testimony of the globalist plan of what's going to happen. And now the media has started to turn on the propaganda once they understood what it is, Don. And you know what they're saying about the Georgia Guidestones now?
What?
They're saying that it was only put up there for instructions if there was a post-apocalyptic event, that the world was destroyed, and now that everyone is dead, this is what we must abide by. And let's be honest, not everything on the Georgia Guidestones was nefarious. It was the idea that you need to maintain the population under 500 million. And we know that's the same number that Bill Gates was spewing out at the Good People organization, that Henry Kissinger was spewing out in 2009 at the United Nations secret meetings on eugenics and depopulation, amongst other things, where we get a lot of the conspiracies about, them trying to get a needle in your arm in order to depopulate the world, is what we've seen with, Bill Gates and his 2010 TED Talks. And, there's a lot of people believe he misspoke, and that might be the case. But I'm trying to say that there seems to be an overwhelming amount of evidence, and that was like a physical piece of stone saying somebody spent $500,000 to get this thing erected. And obviously there's a billionaire club and there's an elitist ideology that there's too many of us in this planet and we're using up their resources.
Yeah, and honestly, I kind of, I'm right there with you on it might actually be better to have them up there just so, more people can be aware, like, yeah, this is the mindset of a lot of these individuals and institutions and organizations. So I think maybe tearing it down was, not the right way to go about it. But then again, who knows? They might have, not to be that guy, it could have been an inside job. Maybe they wanted to erase their tracks. Oh no, nowadays we don't want the people to know that theirs needs to be held under 500,000 or whatever. You never know. It's a point I was going to make earlier. Whether it was being blamed on the Christian right or the Antifa left or whomever. You really don't know who did it.
We just don't know. And for all we know, the elitists wanted it destroyed to begin with. Like maybe they wanted it taken down for that reason, but I doubt it. A lot of tourism came to the city. And I guess I kind of resonate with Scott Walter, although I disagree. He believes, obviously, he's a Freemason now, and him and his brotherhood, they believe that this thing should have stayed up, and it was, the mentality and sentiment was a genuinely good one, because there was a lot of good things about it, which I can't disagree with. There were some good things up there. The problem is the Georgia Guidestones were built, number one, in secret. Nobody knew who made them for the longest time. Ted Turner, his place where he grew up on his grandmother's farm was literally, right around the corner. And there's just, here it is. It's odd. The message inscribed in the slabs articulates the doctrine with some of his interpretation and interpreted as a population control because it calls to maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature and to guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness with diversity. And essentially, a lot of people know that the term New World Order, also one of the ideologies is depopulation. Not only, and let's go over this. A lot of people don't understand the goals of the New World Order. And it's all the Adam Weishaupt utopianism. In fact, the United Nations is a direct result of Adam Weishaupt. As you know, he was a top Freemason. He also was the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, and he wanted to remove private property. No one could have the right to private property, no inheritance, destruction of the family. Remember, your kids now belong to the city and the state. It was an ultra extreme left ideology, destruction of all religions and permeated with atheism and establishment of a global religion that's government run. And as we know, government is the worst steward of anything. The number one cause of death on our planet is usually democide, which is death by government. But that being said, for those out there, we are the Rundown Live, rundownlive.com. We will be back after these commercial breaks and words from our sponsors. Help us out, sponsor us. Check out the rundownlive.com. Pick up a t-shirt or donate right on our website. We'll be back in just a few.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Scrolling all day, time can disappear. Wanna make it count? Why not volunteer?
Posting pics of your food, that takes up time. Time, you've got time to binge all of season 9, though it got so bad.
Time, you got time. We're gonna grow back and be the same browse you had.
Just a few hours to keep families from harm. Help us end home fires, but sound the alarm.
Volunteer for a day to install free smoke alarms in your community.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected. Only at kgradb.com.
Rundown Live, rundownlive.com. I'm your host, Kriston T. Harrison. If you're just joining us, we are talking about the Georgia Guidestones, the destruction of, and how a governor candidate was swatted late on Monday night. Former Georgia governor candidate Candace Taylor recalls a horrifying night when her home in Bexley was surrounded by law enforcement, responding to a call claiming that she had shot her husband 5 times and was preparing to shoot herself. You know, swatting is something that is crazy. It's been something that has been going on, and obviously we've seen Tim Pool. Tim Pool was literally getting swatted like almost by was a fortnightly for a while, bro.
Yeah, it was left and right, man. It was crazy.
Yeah, and like people are like they're just not kind people. That's why I keep my address very hard to find, very secret, and people don't know where I live because people are just nuts. They're crazy. That whole ideology of swatting people is just nuts to me. And you know, it's weird. The last month has given me a little time to reflect. As you guys know, the rundownlive.com is now updated, and we've been restructuring. And as you can see, we've remodeled the studio a little bit. We got a lot more new stuff coming up, a lot new remodeling where we're going to actually be able to even have people in studio doing interviews, and we've been growing. So I want to say thank you to all our listeners out there and a lot of people that don't know. Also, I need to make a special announcement that I will be speaking in Green Bay on July 28th on a Thursday. We'll be talking about different things, and I'll have some more information about that up on our website. As you guys know, we have literally been systematically and surgically cut out of both YouTube and Facebook. But I did find in the last month, somebody sent me a link, bro. Did you know that all the deleted channels from YouTube are cataloged and you can watch the video still?
Really? No, I didn't know that.
There's a website out there, and I'll put it on here. It's called altcensored.com. And I didn't know this, but here literally is a catalog of all the videos. And I'm going to say a lot of them are like provocative. I can see why some of them were banned. Some of them are very prejudiced, and I would say even racist in ideology. But if we go in here, the Rundown Live, and we don't belong with that because we've always been a unifying group. We want to bring people together. But it even tells you on what date the channel was deleted. Like right here, here's Big P Zone. It's still available. But the Rundown Live, that's our other channel. See, it tells you we had 751,000 views on this channel, like 11,000 subscribers. And literally, they took us off the air basically because we said Russia, like the whole like COVID thing came from Wuhan. And that ended up being true. And that's why they pretty much banned us. And as you can see, all our videos are cataloged here, all but one. Can you guess which one is not cataloged here?
Who knows, honestly.
I can tell you. Our January 31st one, where essentially I have video proof that Antifa had a hit list of 200 people to record on January 6th. That one is missing from here. The only place you can find that is on my computer. And I should re-upload it, but I'm going to work on a small segment, I think, after I get off the air today. And we're going to post it on band.video. It'll be available on the Rundown Live, where you can see a website on that was an Airtable website set up by Antifa of 200 photographs of people they wanted recorded on January 6th. And then they went ahead and turned it into the FBI, you know, because they were all little FBI agents that day. And it's like you can't make it up. Like that's complete evidence that at least they had the thought of doing it. Maybe no one showed, maybe no one did it. But now with the January 6th trial, which we can kind of segue into because that's like still going on, and nobody nobody's really talking about it anymore. Everyone thought it'd be this big news thing, like on every channel, like the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. And they tried to make it that, but no one was really buying into it. Why is it?
Yeah, I mean, we called it the very first night they had the opening. It was prime time, 8 p.m., and we called it, this thing's going to be a huge nothing burger, and it was a nothing burger, and then it completely dropped from everyone's attention because no one gave a damn, rightfully so.
Right. And they keep trying to bring it back, they keep trying to bring it back from the dead. And, terms like insurrection, like there was no one charged with insurrection. Ashley Babbitt was murdered by law enforcement, but that's the only time. It's funny. Like, I want to talk about cognitive dissonance because it happens on the right too. Don't get me wrong. Cops love the boot. They love the boot, on the right, not cops. I mean, right wingers love the boot from time to time, unless it was Ammon Bundy, right? And the Bureau of Land Management. The Bundy Ranch scenario. Then all of a sudden, the boot isn't good. And then you had the left on January 6th. They're like, a cab. And all of a sudden they're like, yeah, let's deep throat this boot. Deep throat in the boot. And, essentially, there's that cognitive dissonance. And if you don't know what the term cognitive dissonance is, it's when you have two opposing viewpoints. And to be a better person and to think healthy, you need to root out your cognitive dissonance, because the information we digest is the crops that we will grow in our mind. And so if we're eating GMO news and GMO information, like all the propaganda that comes with wars, and we take it as nutrients and we double down on it, well, our crops are going to go ahead and they're going to sprout GMO information, and other people are going to consume those GMO corn crops in our brain. And I hate to put it that way, but that's the easiest way I can make it, break it down for you guys. We all have cognitive dissonance. This show has always been rooted in trying to better ourselves and rooting out this cognitive dissonance. And January 6th, it's interesting to me. And I think the reason why they're really pushing it, because they're terrified that the Orange Man might run again. And I don't think he should. I really don't. I think he did what he had to do. And he showed us that, you can bring gas prices down if you get out of the Paris Accord. That essentially the CIA was most likely behind the JFK hit with the release of the JFK documents, that there's this globalist agenda. And when the United States wanted to get out of the UN, which is, we don't vote for anyone to represent us at this United Nations, which is essentially the New World Order, people in the establishment didn't like that. And so all the conspiracies that we've been researching and trying to understand essentially were there out in the open, and people were acting as if they were agents of a globalist agenda. They were all there in uniform to try to destroy a character that was very anti-neo-fascism by calling him a fascist. And but I guess that's the real question. Was Donald Trump a fascist?
Well, I mean, that question in and of itself has a lot of nuance, because, of course, the American government and the way it's operated since Operation Paperclip in 1952 has been inherently fascist in and of itself. But with the way that it's contemporarily used by the left, not so much. Like I said, it has a lot of nuance. So if you look at the way America operates, say, as a corporatist nation, because everyone thinks America is a capitalist country, it's not. It's a corporatist country.
Right.
And there's a very thin line between capitalism and corporatism, and that line is monopoly. And we don't need to get off on a whole economic tangent, but corporatism is essentially just another word for economic fascism. So in that sense, yes. Does America, the institution of America's government and the way it operates, have a deep-seated problem with white supremacy? Yes, it does. I mean, ever since they genocided 100 million Native Americans, I think no one can deny that that's an issue. But at the same time, the way that the left tries to pontificate this idea of calling things fascist, I've always really disliked it in a way, because it waters down the term. A fascist, a neo-Nazi is a very specific term that should be applied to a very specific set of characteristics and people. Just because you check some boxes doesn't mean it checks all the boxes. So I think, just throwing the term around willy-nilly to characterize anything you disagree with is a really good way to essentially make fascism more popular, because you're popularizing the term, but you're doing so in a way where you're slapping it on a bunch of things where it might not necessarily fit. And so when something is actually straight up fascist and needs to be called out as such, it doesn't have as much hit behind it when you call it out, because the term has been used so frequently. It's watered down. It's diluted.
Well, it sounds like you're describing segregation to me. Like they're trying to create segregated groups. Like it's everything that an organization, doesn't stand for. Again, that's cognitive dissonance. They push an agenda, but they actually, it's like the person. It's very hypocritical. I'll make it that way. Cognitive dissonance is hypocritical in beliefs, in your mindset, not physically acting out. It's in your mind. You believe opposing viewpoints when it's beneficial to you, and that's like the group think that's a real thing. Like, and when it comes to war, and then when it comes to propaganda, group think is a very real thing, is it not? Because we can see, how people, especially with the Georgia Guidestones, for example, how everyone took to TikTok, because that's the only platform that is getting. I mean, it's like the most addictive platform ever. Like you can be up like, God forbid you wake up at 12 o'clock and you open up your TikTok 12 at night and you're like in bed and you're scrolling because you're not going to bed that night. I don't know what it is. It's like Minecraft. You're getting brain raped by TikTok, and like 90% of it is information that you're interested in. 10% of it, it's scantily nude men and women who are trying to get the opposite sex attracted. And there's like it's become a platform that really, instead of like Facebook, where it really focuses on social identity and social acquaintances and what your friends want to see and who you associate with, TikTok is really focused on information, what kind of information you want to see and what kind of information you want to hear and what you are into. And therefore, it makes your mind go to where you can't even get off of TikTok. I was talking about this. I have a visitor, one of my buddies, another journalist was involved in the Kenosha unrest with me, CJ Halliburton. And we were talking about this yesterday about how TikTok is essentially like crack for the mind. Like literally, he said he had it open and he couldn't close it for 5 hours, and it was like 7 in the morning. And I'm like, bro, like put it down. Like I get it, I do too. Like it's horrible. And why is it that then people see it and then they share it, and there's so much misinformation on TikTok. First of all, I support people's right to post everything. I support your right to be an idiot too and believe dumb things as well, because there's a lot of bad stuff on there that isn't really genuine information. But I think inherently, just like, let's say, a Fritz Springmeier's Bloodlines of the Illuminati book, it has those diamonds in there of like MK Ultra training and things like that. Whereas like some of these videos, people are purposely spreading disinformation. One of my favorite ones was, I was a witness in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. All right. And there was a video of somebody whose foot disappeared, and they're like, oh, it was done on green screen. The whole trial was made on green screen. I'm like, bro, pull up the PBS video, pull up the PBS video. Look at, somebody edited the video. And I literally was getting like, this is probably one of the few times I got a ton of people that were tagging me. They're like, he was there. This is not a green screen. I know one of the witnesses that was there. This is not a green screen. But people were gullible. That was the information they were consuming, and they're growing crappy crops of GMO corn in their mind. And speaking of which, GMOs are in the news.
They are actually, that's another great thing. I'm really glad that you used that analogy, as a matter of fact, is because, it's that old adage, you are what you eat. Well, I've always also used it, you are, or, what you consume. If you consume a bunch of negative crap, then, that's what you're going to believe, and that's going to influence your character and your personality. It's true with information just as much as it's true with food and chemicals and all this other stuff. I'm not sure if you wanted to pull it up or if you wanted me to pull it up.
Yeah, go ahead, pull it up. I'll let you pull it up. And if you guys don't know, so there's a lot of people that don't understand the history of the GMO. And again, so George Soros is another one of these eugenicists, people that believes in depopulation. We'll tie this into the Georgia Guidestones, maintain the population of 500 million, right? And it was believed, and the conspiracy is that, Bill Gates, who invested 500 million shares or whatever, $500 million in the GMO, another person that's abused what I call scientific consensus, because scientific consensus is not science. Essentially, George Soros used the scientific consensus to go after anyone that did an independent study showing that his glyphosate Roundup caused tumors and cancer at an alarming level. And literally, you can't turn on a TV now without a settlement commercial. And the same guys that were behind essentially the GMO scam were running the whole world. Was it World Health Organization scam? It was the same like process. If why change the process if it worked the first time? And as you know, the world marched against Monsanto. In fact, that's where I met Corey Elijah in 2013, another great journalist and reporter who now has kind of totally, since the Kenosha unrest, gotten away from news, and he's doing like Comic-Cons, and he's doing really cool stuff like local events. And I'm very proud of Corey. Corey has went in his own way, in his own path, and we'll definitely try to have him back on because we have the 2-year anniversary of the Kenosha unrest coming up next month. But it's just one of those things that I remember. There was thousands of people. I met a lot of leftists there, and that's how, like in Milwaukee, when I cover like leftist events, people know who I am. They know that we have things in common. I'm there to find out information and share the news. I'm not there to troll. That's the difference between, like, let's say, an Alex Stein than me. Like, I want to give you information. I want to educate you. Stein, he wants to do it too, but he wants to troll. He reminds me of Durst the Worst, who, in Milwaukee, Durst the Worst is the most hated activist because he will surgically destroy leftist agenda. And, he's not a bad guy, but he does have the opinions I don't agree with. And, just like any other one else that's out there to troll, the question is like, what are you actually changing when you're going out there and your whole goal is to make people look dumb? And I get it. There are people that just look dumb, and people need to, like, it's effective. People don't like to look stupid. It's like when they said mask shaming and shame people, on the right that don't agree with you, or punch a Nazi, and, violence is never the answer. But back to what we're talking about here, glyphosates and GMOs, this is where the boogeyman concept really started to come in on the left about George Soros. Now they're very protective of it, and they're like, well, there's no conspiracy behind George Soros. But if you bring up Monsanto GMO, everyone knows that's like a real thing. But at the same time, no one really associates it with Soros anymore, or Bill Gates.
Right. So basically what we have here is an article out of Children's Health Defense. It's Robert F. Kennedy's website. Came out a few days ago where a study showed that 80% of urine samples from children and adults tested positive for glyphosate, which is a known carcinogen. It's has been acknowledged as a known carcinogen by the World Health Organization and a few others, and is the main ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup weed killer that they use to spray as a herbicide on all of their GMO crops. So the fact that they're growing the most GMOs of the entire world, a lot of people don't realize the overwhelming majority of GMO seeds and food come from Monsanto right here in the United States. It says here, a study by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention found glyphosate, the key ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup weed killer, in more than 80% of urine samples drawn from children and adults in the U.S., a finding scientists call disturbing. More than 80% of urine samples drawn from children and adults in a U.S. health study contained a weed-killing chemical linked to cancer. The report by the unit for the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention found that out of 2,310 urine samples taken from a group of Americans intended to be representatives of the U.S. population, 1,885 were laced with detectable traces of glyphosate. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in herbicides sold around the world, including the widely used Roundup brand. Almost a third of the participants were children ranging from 6 to 18. Academics and private researchers have been noting high levels of the herbicide glyphosate in analysis of human urine samples for years, but the CDC has only recently started examining the extent of human exposure to glyphosate in the U.S., and its work comes at a time of mounting concerns and controversy over how pesticides in food and water impact human and environmental health. And the really interesting thing here, to break from the article for a second, to note is something that, because I've been a huge activist against Monsanto for a very long time now, ever since I learned who they were and what they were. So the really important thing to note here is that Monsanto, actually during the Vietnam era, before they were making your Yeah,
I know where you're going with this.
yeah, before they were making your food, before they were, the one who's producing all the GMOs, they were making chemical weapons for the United States Army. So think about that. You have a former U.S. Army chemical weapons manufacturer who's now the one who's producing all of your GMO foods. And that's not to mention that Monsanto was also actually bought out by Bayer AG, the pharmaceutical company, a few years ago for a few $billions. So now actually Monsanto is a subsidiary of Bayer. And the interesting thing about Bayer is if you go back and look through their history, back in the 1930s and 40s and 20s, and in that early to mid 1900s, Bayer was under a different name as IG Farben Pharmaceuticals. And when you look into the history of IG Farben, you find out that this was the company that actually produced Zyklon B, which was the primary chemical used in Nazi Germany's gas chambers. And IG Farben was actually very involved in helping the Nazis perpetuate the Holocaust even beyond that. So you have the company that made the gas chamber chemicals combining with the company that made chemical weapons to be used against innocent people in Vietnam, such as Agent Orange, among other terrible things that people to this very day are still suffering the terrible genetic effects from. There are still to this day in South Vietnam and North Vietnam and Cambodia and some other places, still to this day, babies being born with defects and heart problems and missing limbs and all sorts of other things because of the terrible effects that Agent Orange and some of these other chemical weapons had on the population. Not to mention, there was also a huge lawsuit against Bayer many years ago where they knew that some of their chemicals, or some of their medicines, were infecting people with HIV. And instead of doing something about it, they knew about it and they covered it up. So.
Yeah, and then allegedly, or then it was literally dished out by a guy who allegedly turned in his Jewish comrades for the Nazis in World War II, known as George Soros. And that's like on 60 Minutes, he said that was one of the most fond memories I have ever had, or whatever he says when he's like, talking, and he's got that archetype evil. But then when you talk about this stuff, I mean, literally, that's the type of meetings that the VP of Facebook is going to. Bilderberg, Prince Bernard, Nazis, New World Order agenda, depopulation. And then they implement it in slow kill because much like when you put a frog in a boiling pot, it jumps right out. But if you slowly turn the water up, it boils you. And so I want to use this moment here in the last couple minutes before we go to break and we bring on our amazing guest, Dave DeCamp from Anti-War. The fact that the scientific consensus got Monsanto GMO incredibly wrong. By that, I mean, I'm going to share this real quick on the screen. Let's go ahead, add the stream. In-depth journal retracts independent study linking Monsanto GMO corn to cancer in rats. Oh, we didn't know it would cause cancer. 2013. Here it is.
You want to know why that happened?
They literally, people lost their jobs.
Yeah. Do you want to know why that happened? Actually, there's another thing.
Part that the scientific consensus was predatory.
Yeah, well, another big part that I was going to bring up in 2017, a trove of documents came out called the Poison Papers, specifically the Monsanto papers during the Poison Papers project. There's a great article out of Green Med Info about that. I wasn't able to pull it up today. I completely forgot about it until just now, actually. But they did an article about it back in 2017, where all of these internal Monsanto documents, so this isn't like something made up, these are their own documents that got leaked. And showed that this is exactly what happened, showed that Monsanto colluded with media, with scientists, with television, with Google, big tech, and all these other things, specifically in a conspiracy to cover up the real dangers of their chemicals and whatnot. I'm not sure if am I delayed. Okay, I guess I guess we might have lost Kristan here. He might have froze or something. I'm not sure exactly what happened. But yeah, so there was an article out of Green Med Info that was essentially talking about the fact that Monsanto colluded with scientists with, let me see if we can go ahead and pull it up here really quick. But they colluded with scientists, they colluded with media, they colluded with the EPA, the FDA. There's a whole bunch of them. Info.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the fact that Google Chrome is crap, and it just literally has booted me. And Google are the ones that want to do the AI, universal basic income and everything like that. Very interesting stuff, Don. I apologize. I get booted from time to time. This Google Chrome I saw was freezing up, and it just can't handle the weight of having multiple windows open. So we'll be selective here, but. Essentially, what I was, what you're talking about, obviously, is the fact that the scientific consensus uses its weight to throw around for profit. Essentially, they don't care about your health. They essentially care about the bottom line of the bottom dollar. And as you guys can recall, just recently, when else was the scientific consensus the boss of you? And that was during the whole C-19, the COVID-19 pandemic. They were the ones, it wasn't science, it wasn't the science community. They were the ones saying anti-science, when reality, a consensus isn't science, because there's no scientific consensus saying 2 + 2 = 4 or E = MC squared and debating it. No, because those things are absolute reproducible results. The issue is when they don't know, and when they don't know, that's when a consensus comes in, and they go predatory after. I think there's been probably about 100 scientists that lost their job because they were spending it trying to prove Monsanto GMO with independent studies causes cancer. And as we know in the article you show, that's exactly the case. You can't turn on a TV without a settlement commercial. In fact, we should run the settlement commercials during the Rundown Live, because that's just who they are, and that's who we are. We really dislike globalists destroying our world. We dislike being poisoned. We dislike the idea of depopulation through vaccination, healthcare, and reproductive services. Listen, you have personal decisions you can make in your life, but at least you should know the dangers. And the fact that Monsanto spent millions of dollars trying to prevent a little label on the food that says GMO on it, that alone should tell you everything you need to know. They don't want you to know what you consume. And that's just part of it. We are getting bombarded with chemicals. I was reading a report here in Wisconsin, how that, chemicals are actually causing amphibious creatures in Lake Michigan to change sexes because of our washing machine liquids that get dispersed into the lake. They're literally, the chemicals in it are causing side effects. Not only that, all the opiates and drugs and everything else that is in our urine. And that's spot on with everything you're talking about, toxology. But that being said, we got to go to a commercial break here. We have a guest joining us around the bend, Dave DeCamp from Anti-War. He's got a new podcast out. He's also a contributor to the LA Progressive, which is also a very interesting, he's written a lot of interesting pieces. Nobody likes war. I don't like war. No, there are no winners in war, really, if you look at it, and everyone loses. All that and a whole bunch more. We'll be back on KGRA. You're listening to the Rundown Live, rundownlive.com. Don't forget to support us, find us, the Rundown Live, as well as on KGRA, DB, Band.video, and just about anywhere where video is on, Rumble, Rockfin, you name it. We'll be back.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Scrolling all day, time can disappear. Wanna make it count? Why not volunteer?
Posting pics of your food, that takes up time. Time, you've got time to binge all of season 9, though it got so bad.
Time. You got time. We're gonna grow back and be the same brows you had.
Just a few hours to keep families from harm. Help us end home fires with Sound the Alarm.
Volunteer for a day to install free smoke alarms in your community.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
Now, you don't know it yet, but you are listening to History in the Making while you are listening to this show.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man, yet as mortal as his own.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
Censored by the mainstream media, the destroyer of fake news, and your host of the Rundown Live, Kriston T. Harris.
And we're back from commercial break. You're listening to the Rundown Live, rundownlive.com. I'm your host, Kriston T. Harris. If you're just tuning in to KGRA, Salt Lake City, Hudson Valley, New York, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, make sure that you guys download the podcast available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, anywhere where podcasts are found. And make sure you're checking out the rundownlive.com. You can support us there. We have some new swag, some sexy shirts up there for you guys if you guys are interested in supporting us. And we do take donations. We're one of the only radio programs in all the state of Wisconsin and probably part of the country that's 100% listener funded. And as you guys know, we're independent and we bring a lot of different viewpoints. Maybe not everyone we have on the show people out there agree with, but that's all right. We're okay with that. We want to bring people together on ideologies we can find common ground on. And one of those ideologies is war, anti-war. And we have a great guest joining us. Our guest is a contributor at the LA Progressive, also is a assistant editor over at antiwar.com. Welcome to the broadcast, Dave DeCamp. How you doing, man? How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I just want to clarify, I'm not really a contributor for the LA Progressive, but I let them reprint my articles. But if you Google my name, it's the top site that comes up, even though I've written over 3,000 articles for antiwar.com, because antiwar.com is a bit, I guess, throttled by Google or whatever you call it, shadow banned.
Isn't it crazy, though, how they do that with the algorithms? Like when we first started doing this in 2013, our goal was to title articles what would come up top in the algorithms. Like if you were to search something, Dave, like, Snake Island, soldiers survive. And you said it would be like number one on Google. It would be on the first page. But now, since they have trusted sites and sites that are questionable or whatever Google decides, you might end up on the third, fourth, or fifth, or sixth page of information, and nobody really sees what you write because they don't want that information out there. They want to decide what people hear, what they see out there. And I think it's amazing that you guys have made a lot of headway.
Yeah, I mean, antiwar.com has been around since 1995, so it's one of the oldest independent media sites. I started working there full time about 2 years ago, but they've faced a pretty good amount of censorship. They used to have Google ads, and then Google stopped allowing that to happen just because of the content of the articles that they were putting out. But yeah, I mean, we've managed to do pretty well when it comes to getting our stuff out there, just because the website's been around so long. We have a huge email list that we email all our stuff to. So yeah, we still have a pretty good amount of loyal readers.
Well, it's good that the site has been able to survive as long as it has. Which I actually didn't know it was around since '95. It's been around as long as I've been alive.
Yeah.
So, that's absolutely fantastic. But I saw the other day, it's the reason I messaged you on Twitter, invited you on. You have a new podcast coming out, Anti-War News, where you're discussing all the things that are going on and all the topics and whatnot. So, what really brought you to that? And what were some of the first things you discussed? Because I saw, was it last night or night before last was the first episode. I was scrolling through YouTube at like 2:00 in the morning, and I saw you posted. I was like, oh, look at that.
Yeah. So what I do for antiwar.com, I'm the news editor. I read the news all day, and then I write a few articles at night, kind of short news summaries, and I give it, present it from our anti-war, non-interventionist perspective, free of the pro-war spin that you find, in the mainstream. So the idea is, I average about 6 articles each day, sometimes more, sometimes less, but I write a lot. And I understand to some people that's just not the way they want to digest their news. I've been kind of kicking this idea around for a while to do a podcast to summarize all the stuff that I wrote. And I think it's gotten off to a pretty good start. I put 2 episodes out already. I put them up at midnight Eastern time. I'm in Virginia, and it's for okay, cool. It's for the following day. The idea is you could put it on in your morning commute or whatever, when you're at the gym. And I'm going to try to keep it around 20 minutes, kind of short and concise, just the top foreign policy news stories of the day. Again, from our unique perspective, that we're able to provide people because we're entirely reader funded. Like you just said, this is listener funded. We're reader funded. That's the way you got to be to keep your independent line, because there's not much money in being anti-war, being non-interventionist.
Right.
Yeah, war has changed over the years. Like people aren't fighting wars over hot women anymore. Like back in the day, they'd be like, "Oh, that's my wife. We need to go to war. Let's get her back." Just it's become more complicated. Like obviously, I think war has always been complicated, but being the policeman of the world, like the United States has become or may have always been, it's really brought us to the front and center of just about every conflict in the world. And, really, what is the solution? Like, who really wins in these wars? Is it really even beneficial for the United States to be involved in some of these interactions?
Well, I mean, you see who the U.S. definitely didn't win in Afghanistan, as everybody saw, but the people that did win, are the U.S., arms makers, Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, the people that really run the Pentagon now. I mean, Lloyd Austin, Biden's Secretary of Defense, he was a Raytheon board member right before he took his post. And now, Raytheon is making a killing off of Biden's Ukraine policy. They're shipping billions of dollars in weapons to Ukraine, and a lot of them are made by Raytheon and all the other arms makers. So it doesn't have any benefit for ordinary Americans, the wars that the U.S. has been fighting, since the end of the Cold War. I mean, way before that too, but just, speaking in today in modern history, the wars in the Middle East have just been a total disaster. And it's pretty easy for people to see that now. There's a lot of opposition to those wars. And that's why being anti-war is kind of a bit complicated now, because our involvement, what's happening in Ukraine, everybody, can give us a hard time because they say, oh, you're just focused on the U.S. Why aren't you, speaking out against Russia's war? But, you could find that in every mainstream outlet. But what we're against is why I like to always say we're non-interventionists is because, we are American. We write from an American point of view, and we're against our government being involved in overseas wars, especially funding a proxy war on Russia's border, the largest nuclear power in the world. I mean, it's just an incredibly dangerous policy, and every sane person should be against it. But it seems like so many people are for it. I mean, you see in Congress, it's pretty much a bipartisan consensus. There's been some Republicans that have voted against this stuff, but for the most part, everybody's for it. And even, there's some progressive Democrats that have always been good on war that voted to send $40 billion to Ukraine, that just voted to expand NATO to Sweden and Finland yesterday. So things are pretty bleak. But I think for kind of the ordinary American that's facing these rising gas prices and inflation, and Europeans who are really taking a hit because they're much more reliant on Russian energy, they're all really taking a hit because of these sanctions that Biden pushed. I think a lot of people are waking up and say, hey, why are we sending $40 billion to Ukraine when it's impossible for me to buy a house or really get by, pay my bills. So as this kind of insane policy continues, I think there's going to be a lot more opposition to it will grow.
Exactly. And it's the amount of insane warmongering we've seen from the mainstream media since this entire situation in Ukraine kicked off. As you mentioned, the mainstream, they'll always have their anti-Russian invasion narrative, but they also don't talk about, as you guys have noted on your website, the whole NATO pushing their, proliferation of conflict all the way up to Russia's border, and, the U.S. coup in 2014, and even the Orange Revolution that the Bush administration was involved in fomenting in 2008, really establishing all these this infestation of fascists or neo-Nazis or whomever, whatever little label you want to, put on them, the Azov battalion or regiment before they joined the national Ukrainian military or whatever. And just the fact that our country is sending billions and billions, that we don't even have an accurate count at this point of how much money the U.S. has sent to Ukraine. Meanwhile, average Americans are starving and can't put gas in their car. I mean, there's still the baby food crisis, I think, is still a thing. Like, people can't feed their kids, and it's absolutely insane. But one thing that you did mention that I wanted to touch on is a piece that I read off of antiwar.com just a few days ago, that I'm actually going to be writing an article about myself for the Free Thought Project sometime later this week, is the fact that now a spokesman for the U.S. State Department spoke to the foreign desk, that the United States no longer supports an armed, violent opposition to Taliban rule in Afghanistan, which of course is a good thing. We don't need the U.S. to be, shouldn't have been there in the first place. But that's kind of going to be the point of my article. We shouldn't have been there in the first place, and now we have 20 years, $2.3 trillion, over 2,000 dead U.S. servicemen, and most importantly, over 70,000 dead civilians in this war, supposedly to depose the Taliban. And now the State Department says, hey, you know what? We're cool with them. We're cool with them again. We're going to go back to the 90s, to the 80s, back when the U.S. supported the Taliban previously. So just ignore the last 20 years of death and destruction and chaos. It's insane, brother.
Yeah, it is. It really shows how insane it all is. And, like you said, it's a good policy that the U.S. isn't trying to support a violent uprising against the Taliban. And I think we are going to see, that's something I kind of realized as they were withdrawing, because it was clear that the Taliban was going to take over. I realized how in a few years, we're just going to be, friends with the Taliban, which is something, you think back. I mean, I was pretty young when 9/11 happened. But you think back to that time, all the propaganda against the Taliban. Could you imagine then that one day, the U.S. is just going to start trading with the Taliban-led Afghan government? And it's important to point out that the Taliban never controlled all of Afghanistan before the U.S. Invaded. They were left on a stronger foot than they were before the war. It was just such a disaster, and it does show that that didn't really matter, taking out the Taliban. That was just to stay in the country, to prolong the war, and to keep everybody paid. But unfortunately, right now, the U.S. still doesn't recognize the Taliban government. They have sanctions on Afghanistan. They seized billions of dollars from the Afghan central bank, and Afghans are really suffering. There's a severe food crisis. They've been facing a drought. They just had this big earthquake that killed over 1,000 people, and U.S. sanctions are inhibiting them from being able to import all sorts of stuff and inhibiting aid deliveries because, they technically have. We see this everywhere. We see this in Russia. There's technically exemptions for humanitarian goods for food, but companies, international businesses, and financial institutions, they're just hesitant to do business with a government that's targeted by U.S. sanctions at all because just out of fear. So they're overcautious and they just don't do business with them. So we see medicine shortages in Iran, even though there's medical exemptions for sanctions. So it's pretty bad in Afghanistan. And I don't think Biden has any political will or courage to change that policy and just lift the sanctions and just leave them alone. He's just kind of being a sort of loser, it seems like. And also politically, to be fair, everybody would be against it for the most part, Republicans and Democrats, except for a few Democrats. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the whole 9/11 experience very well because I was sleeping on my parents' basement couch. I was 21 going to college, and that's all we watched that day. And since then, obviously there was a lot of propaganda, weapons of mass destruction, which we never procured or even identified where where those were. Now we've seen since released documents, including the 28 pages around 9/11, that Saudi Arabia was in majority behind or involved at some level in the attacks on 9/11. But yet we went to Afghanistan and killed 1.2 million people allegedly. Do you think that the Afghanis have forgotten that we've been over there?
Well, no. I mean, there was a really good article right after the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan. I forget where it was, and I forget who wrote it. So maybe I wish I could give credit to the author. But it was in a mainstream publication. I was pretty surprised. But you remember when the withdrawal was happening, the narrative was the women, the Afghan women.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what's going to happen to the women? Well, this article explained how all the Afghan women living in rural Afghanistan, not in Kabul, the capital, which the U.S. kind of turned into, a bastion of Western civilization, or so they like to think. But that was where women had more rights. But out in the country, where the Taliban lived, and in other areas, not only Taliban controlled, the women out there were getting bombed by the U.S. constantly. And it just went over how these women lost entire families in airstrikes and raids on their villages. And I think it was called The Other Afghan Women. And people, no, they're not going to forget that. But at the same time, they're focusing now on rebuilding. They have to focus on themselves and rebuilding their country. I don't think we have to worry about, a terrorist attack emanating from Afghanistan now, as all the hawks like to say. So that's why we have to get back there. Afghanistan just happened to be where bin Laden was during 9/11, and the Taliban had nothing to do with the attack. They even offered to put bin Laden on trial. They offered to hand him over to a third country. And then I think they eventually, when the U.S. started the bombing campaign, they just offered to turn him over. But, Bush said, no, can't negotiate with terrorists. And, here we are 20 years later, and just an absolute disaster.
That's the real irony when it comes to it, because it's like, folks like you and me and Kristan and some of these other people who've actually done the research to the U.S.'s foreign policy and what they've done and how they've really went about creating their own enemies. Just look at, first of all, just look at domestically. Prior to the invasion of Afghanistan, it's really interesting when the U.S. military goes to invade these places like Afghanistan or Vietnam, where there's a very large proliferation of drugs, then all of a sudden the United States get this, this huge, drug epidemic. Of course, we know during the Vietnam War, we had Air America and the CIA was literally flooding in hundreds of billions of dollars of heroin from the Golden Triangle in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And of course, before the U.S. came into Afghanistan and deposed the Taliban-controlled areas, there was very little opium production in Afghanistan. And then right after the beginning of the U.S. Occupation, opium production exploded to, I think, 98% now of the world's opium is produced in Afghanistan. And then, of course, the opiate epidemic here in the United States coincided directly with that. So just a little food for thought for the listeners out there. Think about why that is and the parallels between that and what happened in Vietnam. But also looking at how talking again about how the U.S. creates its own enemies. We'll just look back at Operation Cyclone 1978, 1979, and going into the 80s from the Carter to the Reagan administration. The U.S. was literally involved in arming and funding and training the Mujahideen, led by Osama bin Laden at that time. And after that operation collapsed, after the Afghans beat the Soviets in the Afghan-Soviet War, the Muj turned into the Taliban and Al Qaeda. So the U.S. has this history of creating its own enemies and then going to war with them, and then after things fall apart, well, now we're friendly again. So it's this whole cluster bleep of this revolving door.
Well, we rebrand them too, right? Once people started to catch on, because I remember after 9/11, there was, the idea that bin Laden was a CIA asset was a big conspiracy that was fake news and it was censored everywhere. Now it's basically considered canon. Everyone understands that there was that relationship where we armed the Mujahideen, and then we changed the name to ISIS. And then it turned out the American government was actually training them in Jordan and amongst other things. And the propaganda was strong. Like the misinformation was out there strong. I remember when Pat Tillman was the football player. He went over there and they used it as, oh, look at NFL star. He's going over there. He's fighting for us. And, he had a very interesting take where he said that they were fighting ghosts. Whenever they went to go fight people, they'd get there and there'd be no one there. And he died from friendly fire. And you start to ask, it's weird. What is the truth when it comes to war, especially with Ukraine now? Because that's what's saturating our news these days. And you guys were really breaking down kind of what was going on, and the idea that we just want to give them as many guns as we can. We're like, yeah, let's just get free guns. They get guns. Extremists are going over there. Militia are going over there. Antifa's going over there to fight alongside the Azov battalion. You get all this weird bizarreness going on with Ukraine. Why is it that Ukraine is so important to the United States that we are investing so much? Because as far as I see it, the only people that really benefit are the Ukrainians. And if anything, we might feel some offset from war. What happens if Russia decides to launch a nuke because we meddled in that war when we didn't have to get involved at all? Like, there's a lot of bad decisions going on. I thought we used to, am I incorrect in thinking that there used to have to be a proclamation from Congress, a vote in Congress in order to go to war? Why is it that we're able to bypass these congressional votes to go to war these days and we just get involved?
Yeah, I mean, that's been happening for decades, so it's tough to say. I mean, the executive branch just has a lot of power when it comes to war, and then, they don't declare war anymore. They just go into countries and, in the Middle East, they call them counterterrorism operations. And then here supporting Ukraine, they haven't declared a war, but they're certainly involved in a war against Russia. And like you guys mentioned, at the end of this, shipping all these billions of dollars of weapons into Ukraine, where we know that there are extremists, the Azov battalion, mainstream media right before Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th used to refer to the Azov battalion as a neo-Nazi militia, and then that changed to far right. And there's been all these articles that kind of rehabilitating that group. But we know that they're there, and they're getting tons of weapons, really sophisticated weapons from the West. So what is this going to end up like? And when is Russia going to say that's enough and respond by maybe hitting? We know there's the New York Times recently reported that there's CIA on the ground in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. There's special operations forces from some European countries. We know there's British SAS soldiers training Ukrainian forces in Ukraine. So if Russia has, a line on where these troops are, what's to stop them from saying, all right, this is enough. This is enough Western intervention. We're going to hit you where it hurts. And then what's the Western response going to be? This is what we're really playing with fire on this. And it doesn't seem like people realize, I mean, this, even during the Cold War, this is worse. This is worse than, I think, the Cuban Missile Crisis almost, because this is, again, right on Russia's border, pouring weapons in. Now, it happened in Afghanistan, as you mentioned, but that was still technically a covert operation. That was done by the CIA. This is all out in the open, and you have American officials bragging about how U.S. intelligence is helping kill Russians and sink Russian ships and all this stuff. And what's the purpose of it? I mean, they've said it. Lloyd Austin, the Pentagon chief, has said that they're looking to weaken Russia. We've heard this line from a few Biden officials and a lot of media reports. So they're using Ukraine, to fight Russia, and Ukrainians are doing the fighting and dying. And, it goes back, this goes back further than 2014, but the most recent history is 2014, when the U.S. backed the ousting of Viktor Yanukovych, the president who was more friendly to Russia than the U.S. wanted. And this sparked the war in the Donbass. The separatists there seceded, and a war has been going on there since 2014. And most Americans probably don't realize that. They erase history before February 24th. This is all just crucial context that nobody seems to want to pay attention to. And that's part of the point of what I'm trying to do for antiwar.com in the news section and for the new podcast, to kind of put this stuff in the proper framing so people understand.
Right, because Americans are so brainwashed with our corporate media. It's like this, this thirst for war essentially is, it's put into all of our, pop culture. And even with the most recent, you got Top Gun Maverick, and everyone's salivating. Oh, Tom Cruise is back in the cockpit. And I'm like, great, more, Pentagon funded war propaganda. And there's actually a great article out of Mint Press News recently that broke down specifically exactly how the Pentagon was directly involved in helping to create that movie, because it was nothing, it's straight up propaganda. But to answer Kristan's question really quick, because I know we only have a few minutes before we go to break, to answer your question really quick, the reason why the U.S. is able to do what it does now, just so willy-nilly, the executive branch, without any sort of congressional vote or anything, is unfortunately goes all the way back to the very beginning of the Afghanistan invasion, when George W. Bush made this state of emergency. A lot of people don't realize the U.S. is actually still in the same state of emergency declaration that George W. Bush put in place all the way back in 2001, that gives the executive branch all these new special powers to essentially dictatorially wage war wherever it wants to without having to get an authorization through Congress. That is still 20 plus years later in effect. So that's exactly why we're able to do exactly what they want to do, which it's absolutely insane. It should have been repealed long ago.
We got a commercial break coming up. It's sad, first of all, real quick comment before we segue into break. The whole idea that everyone was really excited to Top Gun because it was the first movie that didn't have permeated woke culture in it. That was what everyone was like, oh, it's great, it doesn't have woke culture. It's just funny how they know how to bombard and propagandize certain individuals and ideologies and how to promote things. Also, I agree with you. But my biggest concern is blowback. What's going to be the blowback of Ukraine? We have Antifa over there. We have extremists going over there to fight battles. Will they bring that back here and use it to create some form of domestic terrorism? And that's the next war, the war on domestic terrorism. It seems like it's unending. There's no end to this war. And we're allowing and we're deifying these extremists who are going over there. So when they come back, who knows how they're going to use what they learn over there? We could literally be training terrorists that are going to use it right back here in the United States. We just don't know. All that and a whole bunch more. Our guest is Dave DeCamp from Anti-War. You guys go to antiwar.com. Check out his podcast. It's a great podcast. We're going to share it on the rundownlive.com as well. Whenever we see him post it, we'll make sure we get it up there as we reach a great audience. We'll be back after these messages from our sponsors. You're listening to the Rundown Live on KGRA Radio as well as Band.video. We'll be back.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Scrolling all day, time can disappear. Wanna make it count? Why not volunteer?
Posting pics of your food, that takes up time. Time, you've got time to binge all of season 9, though it got so bad.
Time, you got time. We're gonna grow back and be the same browse you had.
Just a few hours to keep families from harm. Help us end home fires, but sound the alarm.
Volunteer for a day to install free smoke alarms in your community.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
Tune in to the Rundown Live weekdays on KGRA Radio. Kristan T. Harris, Don Vi Jr. Visit therundownlive.com. Rundown Live, rundownlive.com on KGRADB. If you are just joining us on the world's largest digital broadcasting station, we have our guest, Dave DeCamp. I was thinking maybe we'd open up phone lines, but I guess we're going to hold off on that because I have questions, man. Like, they're like the automation of war, which is like drones and now robots and like I'm watching these videos. It's like, how long until we have exoskeletons and we have people doing battle that way? It's like, we're not too far away. It's not far-fetched that in our life, we're going to see some kind of metal suit that's like in the Matrix where you get in and you're walking out like Optimus Prime with like, guns on your hands. But we're already seeing robotic tanks, robotic bombs. And I mean, this goes back because they had these in World War II, because I went to the War Museum. I recently did a presentation in Hudson Valley, New York at Pine Bush. And over there, they had the Weapons Museum, and they literally had remote control, like bombs that they'd roll under tanks using controls. And we're not too far away to having AI literally fighting wars for us. What does that mean? Like, what are you seeing as somebody that's an advocate against war and this whole dehumanization of the battlefield?
Yeah, I mean, that stuff is pretty scary. And you see the Pentagon is really putting a lot of money into research and development of these advanced weapons technologies, including AI and robotics and hypersonic missiles, which move much faster than regular missiles. And the danger with them is that, when it comes to nuclear, the risk of nuclear war, a hypersonic missile, if you see Russia launch the hypersonic missile towards the US, you only have like a very short amount of time to react. So say you think you see a hypersonic missile and you're like, oh, it's a nuke, press the nuke button, but it wasn't a nuke. It just kind of adds to the danger of having all these nuclear weapons pointed at each other. And their justification for it, they're saying that Russia and China are, they're ahead of us in all these technologies, but it's kind of similar to the missile gap during the first Cold War with the Soviet Union, where they always said the Soviet Union was ahead of the US in how many bombs it had, but that just wasn't true. And, there's definitely something to Russia and China going this route too. But as we kind of become more confrontational and are trying to divide the world into blocks, really like the old Cold War, and there's no chance really for diplomacy when it comes to arms control, because the U.S. and Russia used to have a ton of arms control treaties that were negotiated at the end of the Cold War. They dismantled a bunch of bombs, but now there's only one remaining between them. It's called the New START Treaty, and it limits the amount of warheads and missiles and bombers each country can have deployed. But now you got the Biden administration saying that they can't imagine that they're going to be able to negotiate a replacement for the New START. So we could enter an era where there's no nuclear arms control treaties, and we create a new nuclear arms race. And a similar thing could happen with all this AI. We could go into a space arms race because the three powers just really aren't. We just refuse to talk to them. I mean, since Russia invaded Ukraine, Biden hasn't spoken to Putin. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, hasn't spoken with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. This is the policy, too. Besides sending billions of dollars of weapons into Ukraine, he's also just not speaking with Russia. It's incredibly dangerous. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of my concern with it. But who knows where it could lead? Robotic soldiers, AI fighting. I mean, you see what drone warfare is. I mean, it's so disturbing that you have people, teenagers in America bombing people in Afghanistan with like a video game. And it's still going on. I mean, the U.S. just launched a drone strike in Somalia on Sunday that, nobody is talking. People just don't really care when that happens. But we're still at war in Somalia. They've been bombing Syria, kind of stepped up drone strikes in Syria against what they say are ISIS leaders and Al-Qaeda leaders. But who knows really? So it's still going on.
Yeah, literally 10 years ago, the American public was convinced that there was no drone program. And here we are, we're talking about it all the time and every day. And I wrote an article in 2013 about DARPA implanting brain chip interfaces in soldiers in order to record all their visual effects so that when they die, they can access how they died and where they died and all this other interesting things. Like this technology, I mean, when we start talking about Bionic Commando, like the video game from the 80s and 90s, like that's where we're going with a lot of this. Like they'll be able to, run and act faster, move faster, be superhuman, have information at their fingertips, and maybe even be able to be remote controlled. I think there's a movie about that where your job is to control another human being on the battlefield and people rent out their meat suits. And I know it sounds all far-fetched. A lot of it is like not here tomorrow, but I can't forget to mention that they're already announcing that in 3 months, Elon Musk is going to unveil his iRobot that has AI consciousness. And, we're going to be able to have these in homes like iPhones pretty soon, doing laundry and changing the oil in the car. So it's interesting how it's going to impact our reality of war in third world countries that don't have this, because it's going to allow us to be bullies even more so than we are now already. And we all seem to do it under the guise of the United Nations, which we don't really vote for anyone to represent us there, but it seems like even more and more we are following a globalist agenda instead of local, where we actually know how to deal with things that are best for our community. And I'm a little concerned, like I mentioned, with the blowback from what happened in Ukraine, because Ukraine really seemed like, to me, like a honeypot. They spent 4 years building up Russian collusion. And as we've seen with the Durham probe, that there's a lot of falsities there. There was Clinton funding and pushing behind it. It wasn't exactly what is all made up to be. But yet you have a whole set of individuals in the world that digest this GMO news and grow crappy crops in their brain, and they spread the information by feeding other people. And it's really hard for people out there to get genuine news because of the propaganda. And so then all of a sudden, we have this new administration, and Russia dove right in. It was like a honeypot in order to go after people who are anti-globalist, which includes China, which includes Russia. And I would even dare say the United States, maybe during the Trump administration, would seem kind of anti-globalism. That doesn't mean that we're not pro-globalism. We're against neo-fascism, which is the way they are spreading this globalism. It's without any representation.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I was just going to say, one of the interesting things that we've seen with regard to Ukraine is the involvement of Elon Musk in using his Starlink technology to assist the Ukrainian military in locating these Russian troop positions and whatnot. I know that's something that Jason Burmis has actually done a lot of talking about in any of his broadcasts, where he's rightfully so called out Elon Musk because the media and everywhere else is doing this great job of whitewashing Musk as this this white knight, sort of similar to how they did with Trump. And then it's like, I'm not gonna lie, Musk has some great things about him and whatnot. Yeah, he's, so where's the Epstein list and all this other sort of stuff, and he's a great troll on Twitter and all of that. But the fact of the matter is, that he is using a lot of his technology still as a front for the military-industrial complex to proliferate all of this conflict. And as I said, using Starlink and helping the Ukrainians and their military, and a lot of his technology being funded, or at the very least, partially seeded by DARPA and things like that. So it's a really sort of a razor's edge scenario. And just to touch on what Dave had mentioned previously, the drone program, I mean, what we know just from Daniel Hale, who is a fantastic whistleblower who should get just as much attention as Julian Assange, in my opinion. We know that the U.S. drone program for years now has killed upwards to 90% civilians in all of its targets. Like, out of everyone that is killed in the U.S. drone program, 90% of them are innocent civilians. And Daniel Hale revealed this when he whistleblowed and released all these documents proving as such. And the U.S. government knows this. They knew it before Hale leaked all these documents, and they've done absolutely nothing to rectify it. So just goes to show the level of warmongering in the Pentagon, where they know that almost 100%, like upwards of 90% of people they're killing are innocent civilians, and they don't care. And oftentimes they escalate the drone program. And as you mentioned, there's ramping up bombings in Syria and Somalia here recently. So what was the point you were going to make, Dave? I apologize.
Oh, yeah. Well, just to touch on the Elon Musk thing, I think that's a good point that a lot of people don't seem to make. They think he can be our savior, if he takes over Twitter. But again, he's definitely interesting. And there are some positives to him, I think. But, SpaceX, I remember they have this contract with the Pentagon to make a rocket that can deliver military equipment anywhere in the world in a few hours.
Yeah.
And also, he's helping Ukraine in the war with the Starlink. And I remember when that happened, he kind of acted like he did it on its own, but then it was later revealed that the U.S. government, facilitated the whole thing and I think paid for it. I'm not sure that they definitely paid for all of it, but I know at least a little bit. But yeah, and then with the drone war, you look at Biden's the last day the U.S. was really in Afghanistan, August 29th. They launched a drone strike in Kabul that slaughtered a family of 10 innocent civilians, including 7 children. Mm-hmm. And like you said, the Hale leaks show what they already knew is that these strikes always kill civilians, but they haven't done anything to change it. And there's never any accountability. The Pentagon investigated itself and said, oh yeah, it was a mistake, but nobody's going to get punished. They did it again with a major airstrike in Syria that killed over 50 civilians in 2019. That the New York Times just recently did some good reporting on the U.S. air war against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Massive civilian casualties that were going on, mostly under Trump at the end of Obama, but during the early Trump years. I mean, they were just leveling cities in Syria and Iraq.
Yeah.
And nobody really talked about it.
I was one of the few that actually was reporting on that very early on, because I've never been one to shy away from my mistakes. In 2016, I did support Trump, and then once he actually got into office, and I noticed, oh, this guy's just like every other douchebag we put into power. I quickly recanted on that, and that was one of the first things that I called out was everyone put up this idea, oh, Trump is anti-war. He's I actually, I believe it was December of 2020, I put out an article, and it was the second article I ever published on the Free Thought Project. As a matter of fact, it's a 5,000 word piece where I really just broke down every facet of Trump's foreign policy and explained exactly how he might not have started any new wars, but he absolutely exacerbated every existing war we had to absolute horrific levels. I can't remember exactly where it was, but there was this one particular city in Iraq that was attacked so badly that there were literally rivers of blood running through the streets, and there was an overwhelming majority of dead was the civilian population rather than the ISIS targets that they claimed they were going after. And yeah, some of the targets were also killed by ISIS, but equally as much, if not slightly more, were also killed by the U.S. and coalition forces there. So, for anyone who still clings to that Trump was anti-war fantasy, definitely check out my article, Anti-War Trump Debunked, on the Free Thought Project, and you'll see very quickly that was this not the case at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting because so he ramped up all the wars at the beginning of his administration, and towards the end, he did dial it back a bit, and he set up this deal to get out of Afghanistan, which was all well and good. But you see, I mean, of course, the deal. I don't know if he would have actually followed through on that withdrawal if he was still president. All that media
Right.
pressure. I mean, he couldn't follow through on pulling 1,000 troops out of Syria, or it was a few hundred at the time, where he backed off on that twice. But anyway, this was kind of the Pentagon's agenda, was to step back a bit in the Middle East to focus on, the so-called great power competition, as they call it, with Russia and China. Trump's Pentagon outlined that in its 2018 National Defense Strategy. So it was all part of the plan. And, Russia is the focus right now, of course, with Ukraine, but the long-term goal is China. And of course, we were talking about building up enemies, having friends that turn into enemies. I mean, you look at how the U.S. has built up China over the past 40 years. I hear this a lot. People tell me, no, you don't have to worry about China. They're all making money in China. They're all Biden's controlled by Xi Jinping. But, there's been a pretty serious shift in the past few years, and we're seeing sanctions against China. They just recently banned imports from Xinjiang, that region in the West where the Uyghurs are. Nancy Pelosi's going there now. She's going to be the first House Speaker to visit. Well, she's going to Taiwan. She's going to be the first House Speaker to visit Taiwan in 25 years since Newt Gingrich went over there. And that stuff really angers China, how the U.S. has been increasing its support for Taiwan. We're seeing more U.S. warships go through the Taiwan Strait, sail in the South China Sea. And again, this is long-term because our economies are so intertwined. I mean, you see how the U.S. sanctions against Russia are hurting us. Imagine if we did that against China.
Yeah.
I mean, we would be decimated. But so this is going to take a long time, maybe 10, 20 years before things get really hot. But this is the direction everything's going.
Exactly. One of my biggest concerns actually is if they're unable to successfully, because of course, as we mentioned earlier, the big goal with Ukraine is to weaken Russia, is to really set up this whole, we mentioned on the show a lot actually that there's this sort of a competition of who can establish the New World Order. Of course, we have this Western world order that the U.S. has attempted to establish for all of these decades. But of course, we also know Putin has mentioned, the establishment of a Russian New World Order and the Chinese New World Order. So it's sort of this, butting of heads of, who actually gets to take the reins of power. And so it's just, there's multiple facets and nuance to the whole situation. And one of my big concerns is that should this proxy war to essentially take Putin out of power, because this is one of the first things I reported on in the early days of the war, is I was actually watching a broadcast on Al Jazeera English, and they had one of their, as like a Ukrainian professor from one of their top universities, and he said the quiet part out loud right toward the end. He was we to remove Vladimir Putin from power, and I was like, there it is. You said it out loud. And that was one of the first times, I believe, that was actually said in any of this dialogue that we've seen. Of course, it's been said multiple times now, the Washington Post and wherever.
Biden said it.
Yeah, removing Putin from power. And so that's one of the big concerns, is if this proxy war isn't able to accomplish that, because very early on, I've said it just through my analysis, because I've done foreign policy and geopolitical analysis for upwards of 10 years, even before I was, doing journalism is just something that I was interested in. And even a year before, about a year and 9 days, actually, before the invasion, I said the U.S. is going to turn Ukraine into Syria 2.0, because I was watching an episode of the Ron Paul Liberty Report, and they were talking about something that was going on in Ukraine that day. And I shared it, and I said, you watch, just watch it happen. Sometime soon, there's going to be an invasion. And I said, quote, the U.S. is about to turn Ukraine into Syria 2.0. And that was a year before the invasion. We've seen that occur now, even more so than I thought would be the case. But the big concern that I'm kind of attempting to get to is the fact that now we've seen, starting back in April, that the U.S. is starting to repaint their military vehicles in Europe from the tan that we see, in the Middle East, to this dark forest green. And it just seems like, that's a regional color there for that general area. You know, the Eastern Europe, a lot of green forest there. So that's a bit of a concern, especially when you now see the U.S. military, or the Army specifically, is starting to drop their recruitment standards and try to buff up, you know, recruitment. It's like there's something going on behind the scenes that we might not know about. It's a little concerning.
Yeah, I wonder if they really think, you know, because in the beginning of the war, Zelensky was calling for the West to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which would mean going to war with Russia. They would have to shoot down Russian planes and bomb Russian missiles inside Russia. And, you know, there were a few proponents for it in the U.S. Adam Kinzinger, the Republican from Illinois, super hawk, just completely out of his mind. But it was still like the fringe that were calling for that. But I do wonder, like those things you mentioned, you know, we're seeing this NATO that build up in Eastern Europe too. If they actually do think that they can go to war with Russia, if that's, you know,
And
on the table.
just that idea itself is absolutely absurd. Because Vladimir Putin made this point just a few days ago, and I had been making the point well before he said it during his speech. And I said, you know, if you think Russia is even using a fraction of their full military power in Ukraine right now, you're kidding yourself. And then he essentially said the exact same thing in a speech recently. He says, if you think Russia's anywhere near, I'm paraphrasing here, but anywhere near using, you know, even just a small percentage of its military power, you're wrong. We haven't even begun. And to hear that coming from the man sitting on top of the world's largest nuclear arsenal is a kind of a holy crap moment. And, you know, and it shouldn't be for people here in America when you realize how large Russia is and just how large their military is. I mean, this isn't anything new. Just look at World War II, the hundreds of millions of Soviets they sent in across Europe to defeat Germany. Russia has a huge friggin' army. This is not a new thing. So to think that this tiny little country of Ukraine, I mean, it's not tiny, but, you know, comparatively speaking, tiny country of Ukraine, to think that they're exhausting their military capability to the brink of being unable to sustain them, laughable. But that's the point we see in the New York Times and the Washington Post. Oh, Russia's getting defeated. Russia can't sustain their military presence. And what crack are you smoking? They barely have a military presence. If they were to go full bore, it'd be over in 24 hours.
Yeah. You really saw that narrative in the beginning when they invaded near Kiev in the north there, and then they pulled out. You know, that was, you know, Russia's going to lose. Let's give them more weapons. We want to see Russia weaken. That's when that narrative was really being pushed. But, and I mean, Russia has definitely taken some heavy losses in this war. But like you said, I agree that they haven't unleashed the full power of their military because, you know, we didn't see what I don't like calling it the strategic bombing campaign, as they call it, because it's like kind of a fancy word for a really barbaric thing. Yeah. We didn't see Russia like level Ukrainian cities and really take out, you know, railways and roads and infrastructure like the U.S. did when it invaded Iraq, like the U.S. did when it was bombing ISIS and stuff. We just didn't see that. And Russia is capable of doing that. So I think when they pulled out, the idea was to kind of destroy as much of Ukraine's military infrastructure as they could in that area and kind of distract them as they move forward in the east and the Donbass. And we've seen them just make gains now, slowly, but they're making gains. And it's a brutal war. I mean, they're slugging it out. It's just an artillery war. Lots of people are dying.
Yeah,
but it could
the surrenders are off the charts. When just looking at, you know, the Azov battalion stronghold in Azovstal, and now in recently in Severodonetsk. I mean, it's the surrenders are off the charts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. But it's a brutal war, but it could get a lot worse, which people don't seem to understand. I mean, it could get much worse.
It's really interesting because I recently did a piece for the Free Thought Project, which is like 5 stories you're ignoring or 5 stories being ignored while the media obsesses over Roe v. Wade. And the very first one was titled, "What the hell is even going on in Ukraine?" And is essentially breaking down, like, you know, now there are these NATO powers that are sort of, you know, kind of backing off of this idea of, you know, following the U.S. into this other, you know, this protracted quagmire that we've seen in the Middle East, because they're really starting to realize they need cooperation with Russia just for energy's sake. And then, you know, we're approaching that, at least in France, I believe in the next few days, is being called like European Doomsday or something, where the energy supplies from Russia are going to be completely cut off. And so it's, you know, figure out how you're going to warm your houses essentially, and then do, you know, all these other things. But we're seeing another point that I made in that article is that it seems like at least some of our media is now kind of starting to turn on Zelensky a little bit, you know, talking about how, you know, all these losses are because Zelensky wouldn't communicate with the CIA. And then we saw that piece where, you know, Biden kind of threw him under the bus, where it says, you know, Zelensky didn't want to hear it when we told him there was an invasion coming. And so it's sort of shifting a little bit of the narrative from, you know, like, oh, Zelensky's this great hero, to sort of souring against him. And even, you know, I saw, I don't remember her name, but she was one of the former national security people from the Trump administration, was on Fox and Friends. Now it's probably about a month ago. And she said, Ukraine is losing this war terribly, badly, grinding defeat, and, you know, all this other things. And it's just interesting to see how now the narrative of Ukraine is losing is starting to come into the mainstream, whereas previously that was blasphemous. You couldn't even suggest that Ukraine was losing, and now Newsweek and CNN and Fox and even the New York Times is like, you know, yeah, they're kind of losing. And, you know, those of us that have actually been analyzing the situations, no shit, they've been losing.
Yeah, guys, we're coming across the end of the break here, end of the show. Geez, it was a fast show today. We got about 3 minutes left, and I want to give Dave a chance to plug his stuff. I always support people starting new podcasts. This is one that's close to my heart because at one point I was a war supporting Republican before I ran into a guy named Ron Paul, where I was like, what? Wars are bad? You know, and it made me really think about, you know, blowback and would 9/11 even happened if we wouldn't have been over in the Middle East to start with, amongst many other things. And you start to think about how would we like it if China or Russia was here patrolling our neighborhoods, ransacking homes, having drones flying over, bombing and killing innocent people. We'd probably be pissed too. So like, it's just one of those things that's always been deep to my heart. We need to kill the world with love. We need to change the world with love and spread kindness and love and lead by an example. But that isn't really what I see here. And Dave DeCamp, I really appreciate your hard work, what you are doing. And we would love to have you back on, you know, sometime soon, especially if you're breaking news, and help spread the love. Let our listeners know where they can find out more about you and what time and what day your podcast airs.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. This was fun. So if you go to antiwar.com, you see the top section of the page is the big news section. I write a lot of those articles in there. And then the show, I'm going to put up at midnight, every weekday. I start Sunday at midnight, so it's for Monday morning. So every morning during the week, you'll be able to download it. You could find it on all the podcast apps. I might be missing some. If people, if there's something I'm missing, let me know. And then it's on YouTube and Odyssey. I should probably get on more video streaming sites because we know YouTube isn't the best for people like us. But yeah, that's it. And you can follow me on Twitter at DeCamp Dave. And yeah, again, thanks for having me. And I'm just trying to kind of give people a lot of news coverage, again, from our perspective.
Thank you for joining us, Dave. It was fantastic having you here.
Yeah, man, it was great having you on, and we appreciate it. Make sure you guys are tuning in tomorrow to the rundownlive.com. Live weekdays, 11 Central Standard Time, 12 Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we have guests all week, so make sure you're tuning in. And if you don't know where to find us, right now our Rockfin is starting to pick up pretty hot. There's a lot of comments in the Rockfin. Rockfin's a great platform. If you want to know how to find the show, the rundownlive.com, and on the top right-hand side, there's a link tree as every way possible to listen to us. Rumble, our YouTube strike zone isn't up there as we are on our final strike on our third channel on YouTube because, we can't let them win, but all that and a whole bunch more. Support Dave DeCamp, donate. There's a spot to donate on antiwar.com and help keep independent news and people out there free for you guys by donations, aggregations, thumbs ups, liking, comments, all that, and a whole bunch more. You guys stay blessed. We'll see you guys tomorrow. You're listening to the rundownlive.com. Find this show if you like it. iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, and KGRADB.com, where they have the database of all our previous shows and our syndication. Guys, stay blessed.